16th day of April 2023. I almost said 2022. Nuclear doesn't take a break from being evil, and we shouldn't take a break ourselves. Always takes me a minute to get up to speed. Dana, how are you? I'm also known as nuclearproctologist.org. And you can call in at 709, 589-4406. 4406. Food was banned from 14 prefectures by 55 countries for a decade. They replaced key positions, people in key positions in those 55 countries, removed restrictions on 40 of them. And they being the International Atomic Energy Agency. We have a poll tonight that is a very, very important poll. Very, 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 very important. Poll. Somewhere. Should journalists, TV producers, owners of major medias be jailed for faking videos and pictures inside of Reactor 4 fuel pool at Fukushima? If that's confusing for you, you probably don't watch TV. That's the actual Reactor 4, and to your left is media pretending that that's Reactor 4. So the world media's participated in that lie, and the big NGOs. There was many, many medias, it's just a small fraction of them. They're pretending they're in a building that actually doesn't exist. That should really terrify you. That should concern you. Because it does concern you. And so tonight, that's what our poll is based on. Should the people that fake being in the building that don't actually exist to trick you into complacency and to eating food from the nuclear wasteland be jailed? I think it should be the death penalty personally, obviously. Here's two of the reactors that done the same thing to the fake being in the fuel pools that were 100 plus feet above the carnage you see left. So that's a pretty interesting thing. Why would the world's media pretend they're in a building that actually don't exist? That's a great question. That's a great question. Dana, you threaten everybody with a spoon again? No. Maybe, if it works, who knows. But I don't know a lot of people that are intimidated by a spoon personally. Are you one of them? Last show was Wednesday. I couldn't do a show on Thursday. I couldn't do a show. I rescheduled it because I do my shows at 10 p.m. at night time. And I scheduled it for 10, but then I decided not to post it. Then I scheduled it for 11. I still decided not to post that. And at 11, I scheduled it for 12 that night. I still couldn't hit the go button. And then I was burnt out all the next day, and Saturday and today I've been pretty burnt out. I've been at this a long time, right? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress. So that's the no-go zone. That's right around the difficult to return zone, a.k.a. what we normal people call them a nuclear wasteland, right? Now, they're growing food in that nuclear wasteland. They're never stopped. but 14 prefectures that are surrounding the nuclear wasteland are no-go zones too if you've got common sense. Now, so 55 countries banned the food from those prefectures. That's almost half the country. This is just a little tiny fraction of the local area they're trying to manipulate into. That is incredibly radioactive. It's like when they say they have 1,000 tanks, but when you count the tanks, you only get 750 if you include the small ones.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4.
What used to be reactor building number 4, they're all going to tell you the same thing. Of course, there is no reactor building number 4. So now there's a big push. This is another community, Idiot, where they're trying to convince people to go back in there because they claim it's safe, and they use these fake Geiger counters and claim little sections of the no-go zone. So those yellow and white sections, little tiny spots in the nuclear wasteland itself that they admit is a nuclear wasteland, is where they want to move your loved ones back into. Soon after tsunami damaged 3 reactors, Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, March 11th, 2011, the Japanese government issued an emergency declaration and ordered people living nearby to evacuate. Well, that's not 100% true. They ordered a couple of 100,000 to shelter in place about 5 days to 15 days after the meltdowns started. It's completely dishonest to suggest that they moved everybody out of the area. It's complete fabrication, actually. Radioactive material. This was multiple nuclear reactors that melted down. And they're going to call it radioactive material. It's like saying the assassin shot Shinzo Abe with a feather instead of with a gun. It was leaking. Does that building look like it's leaking, or does it look like it actually doesn't exist anymore? Because you can't be both of them, right? By the way, at the top of the building, those depictions up there, that's where the fuel pools are. So how can they be in the fuel pools when they actually don't exist on any of the buildings? Does that look like it's leaking to anybody? Does it look like it's 190 feet tall to you? Reactors. There's over 300 police officers have dropped dead while working in the nuclear exclusion zone, by the way. A year later, after the plant was brought to cold shutdown, we can't bring it to cold shutdown when there's no reactors and no fuel pools, right? So that's reactor 4. There's no reactor, no fuel pool. The reactor is at the top of the building, so are the fuel pools. There's no top to building 3. There's no top to building 4. You can't bring it to cold shutdown if there's no top to a building, right? It can't be leaking when it doesn't even exist. You can't bring it to a cold shutdown. Government divided the surrounding region into 3 zones based on amount of radioactivity. Now, I've done entire shows showing you the entire country is brutally radioactive, not 3 zones. So the zones that they're talking about are 3 zones: the orange, the white, and the yellow. They're claiming that's the only places that are radioactive. They actually radiate the entire planet. They comprise a zone where evacuation orders could be lifted early once decontamination. You can't decontaminate a nuclear wasteland by picking up 1-ton bags of dirt. A restricted zone subject to strategic decontamination. There is no strategic. There's the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society. The immigrants don't speak the language. They're not strategic, right? Zone where evacuation orders could be lifted at difficult return. Zone where radiation levels were high. Every organism in the prefecture was incredibly contaminated. because everything was contaminated. Excuse me. And the worm's excrement was 1.4 million becquerels a kilogram. Of course, that's all a worm does is eat and excrete. Part of the difficult return zone still have high radiation as expected. So does Tokyo, which is 200 miles away. 7 towns, villages, cities that made up a total of more than 337 square kilometers. This is a new, because they don't say nothing a year or two later, then they'll come out and they'll, all of a sudden, the area is smaller than it was 2 years ago. But no, you can't decontaminate these communities. Difficult to return zone is a nuclear wasteland zone. There's no such thing as a difficult to return zone. This is a construct of Fukushima meltdowns. As infrastructure decontamination efforts progressed, evacuation orders were gradually relaxed in pockets of the decontaminated or difficult to return zone. So this is what they're talking about, these little pockets. So we've been covering this for over a week now. Over a week, this has been the #1 headline. What, that head? No, the end of the headline. Parts of the difficult return zone, aka nuclear wasteland, have high radiation levels, and that is expected to continue for years. These are maniacs. Sorry, I was having a drink there. Difficult to return zones, nuclear wasteland opens up. See, it don't sound right. So difficult to return zones open up, which is a nuclear wasteland. You can't. You're going to pick up the topsoil on 3% of the land anyway, where you're going to move people into, because you can't clean up the forest, the trees, the bushes, the houses, the streets, the fences, the kindergartens, the schools, the hospitals, the infrastructure, the playgrounds, the air. You can't clean it up, see? But then it was picked up topsoil in 3% of the land where they were going to want to manipulate people to go back into, was those little sections. And cleaning up is an absurd joke, because it's only the homeless and destitute that are in their paper suits, and that, right, you're not sending in someone with a game plan. You're not sending someone in that's motivated or educated or articulated about nuclear. You're sending in people who know nothing and trying to get a paycheck each day, cash each day. Most of that's going to be stolen from them by the nuclear industry. These are the actual heroes we're talking about, by the way. Although the zone remains in place in parts of Iitate village. So there's Nami, Nakuma, Iitate. These are the 3 major places. Tomoka. These are the 4 or 5 major places that are right around the nuclear plant itself. You know, almost within eyesight or within eyesight of the nuclear power plant. So everything's within 7 kilometers of the nuclear disasters, ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns. And they need to give nuclear some credibility, right? They need to say it's not as bad as it is to those that are not paying attention. They do that by claiming that these places are safe, despite the fact it's impossible for them to be safe. And then manipulating complacent people, vulnerable people, to habitating, living there. And somehow or another, apparently, that's supposed to justify that it's now safe. It can't be safe. It's still melting down, for goodness sakes. So another area, aka when evacuation orders were relaxed for a difficult to return zone in nuclear wasteland, Katsuro village is another Akuma town, followed an opening in March. So they've opened up a bunch of these small sections. And they got people, they're saying it's safe to be there, but you can't cross the street because it's too radioactive. Can't stop on the way to your house because it's too radioactive. Can't go out in the garden because it's too radioactive, but you can go to your house. That's a nuclear wasteland, surrounded by a nuclear wasteland in a wasteland, but they don't call it a nuclear wasteland, they call it a difficult to return zone. And so for that reason alone, that they're willing, the nuclear industry, the atomic energy agencies, United Nations organizations, ERPA and UNSCLEAR and the rest of them, are willing to look the other way, means they shouldn't exist. They have no right to exist. They should be prosecuted and publicly executed for what they're doing. We're going to have to bring back public execution to deal with the nuclear industry. It's so out of control now. And at some point, that's exactly what we're going to end up doing. And it's going to be retroactive. In the small pockets of difficult to return zone, and part of that is, they fake these reactors being in the fuel pools, and this is what we're going to poll tonight. Should journalists, TV producers, owners be jailed for faking videos and pictures inside a reactor 4 fuel pool? Should journalists, TV producers, owners be jailed for faking being in a building that doesn't actually exist? Does that sound stupid? That we should hold people that manipulated and poisoned everybody guilty? And so reactor 4, I'll show you a picture you won't see anywhere else. All 13 of you. So that's all 4 sides of reactor 4. That's the only time you'll ever see that picture, is because I produced it. It doesn't exist anywhere else. Thirsty tonight. Dana, thirsty. Nuclear bad. Ow. Me, Dana. Nuclear bad. That's quite the picture, right? Because you can see reactor 4, all 4 sides of it. So there's all 4 sides of it. So what's the odds it looks like the building to your left? Arnie Gunderson claims it looks like that building.
Now, the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
Uh-huh.
And Unit 4 has always been my biggest concern. If you watched our website, on the very first week of the accident, I was saying that if Unit 4 were to catch fire, you'd have to evacuate Tokyo.
So him and his wife should be prosecuted for doing that, right? They're part of that poll. Helen Caldercock, Christopher Busby is part of that poll. Demonic little demons. Numbers for Nami Town and Akuma Town are at 15%, and then Futaba Town, which is the south side of the nuclear meltdown, Akuma and Futaba are actually part of the nuclear. Excuse me. My apologies. Part of the nuclear meltdown. Maybe I should just burp. We're allowed to be rude. Which caused these no-go zones that normal people call nuclear wastelands. So confusing, right? In January, that's what laws are. They're meant to confuse you, so don't feel bad. In January this year, a barbershop in Akuma Town, which is a ghost town, a no-go zone, evacuated, which is also a repository for 14 million one-ton bags of the 30 million that they emit to. A barbershop restarted in its original location 2 kilometers away from ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns, according to the Akuma Chambers of Commerce, who've probably never been there and certainly don't have an office there where they're going to be hanging out. The barber is the first of its 260 members to resume businesses. There were 260 businesses in the Akuma, and he's not resuming business if there's no customers. He's not going to go sit there all day doing nothing. It's just absurd to suggest, but that's what they got done. And the areas that have opened up have management plans in progress in case of another earthquake or other disaster. So if you're in a no-go zone, a nuclear wasteland, and you don't evacuate, and you wait for another nuclear recriticality, nuclear meltdown to kick back up, that's probably still ongoing as we speak. That makes you the village idiot, I guess. They are also promoting cultural events, including festivals and cherry blossom viewings in the nuclear wasteland for victims who have had to demolish their homes because of a nuclear wasteland. Overnight facilities have been built to accommodate short stays by the batshit Uchibori government. A medical clinic in Fukushima, the nuclear wasteland where nobody's going to go. Where did they get those that equipment to? Because there's a hospital that was looted, right next to it, in the nuclear wasteland. Well, progress has been made in the difficult to return zone, aka nuclear wasteland. More than 90% of the locations within it have evacuation orders still in place, so only 10% is open of a nuclear wasteland in a nuclear wasteland. So only 10% of the white spots is open, or the yellow spots, which is the ones that's going to open in 2023. The white ones open in 2022. It's just so hard to wrap my mind around. How the hell do we ever get this evil anyway? So this is the spot they're going to open in this year. It's NAMI, I think it is, right? Which they're opening 3% of it, of NAMI, right? This is NAMI. So 3% of it is open. So you got to drive into the nuclear wasteland to get to your house. You can't go outdoors or cross the street. You don't have any neighbors or anything like this, so to speak. You can't stop on the way through. You just got to drive through a nuclear wasteland to get to your house, which is surrounded 100% by what they admit is a nuclear wasteland that they call a difficult to return zone. It is a nuclear wasteland. Areas have been designated for decontamination infrastructure work that will enable residents to return during the current decade. Roads will need to be built so people can return to the little sections. Roads got to be built into these little sections so people can get back and forth. As the original residents grow older, many will never go back. I mean, some areas will likely remain abandoned in the nuclear wasteland that they call a difficult to return zone, but it's a nuclear wasteland. It shows you how crazy nuclear actually is. How the nuclear power industry is completely kooky. It's completely batshit lunatics. Nuclear disasters cause extensive physical, mental suffering for the evacuees. Radiation does more than that. And financial hardship for the many businesses were forced to close. Under the Japanese fake laws, the operator of the nuclear plant, the Japanese government, because they were nationalized, as they went bankrupt right away, is liable for an unlimited amount of compensation, which no one can seem to get out of them. Don't worry, we got unlimited compensation, except for everybody that was there, to provide swift relief to the victims. Really, I can't believe they actually used the word victims. And SWIFT is 12. If 12 years is your version of SWIFT, you should be immediately, because we don't want to use that word no more, you should be immediately prosecuted and disposed of like a rabid animal. A group of experts appointed by the government indicated a rough estimate for compensation in accordance with the losses, damages caused by nuclear meltdowns, aka accidents. This is called a middle guideline. A group of experts that they don't name, and we can only assume is the worst of the worst of humanity has to offer, covers the cost of evacuations. That's mighty nice of you. You got to run away and leave all your resources, all your assets behind forever, your graveyards, your pets to starve to death. They're going to call that mental anguish. Fees associated with temporary residence, 12 years. of after bankruptcy. So far, using the middle guideline, TEPCO paid $78 billion. $78 billion. Well, $25 billion is enough to build geothermal for the entire country of Australia. They're going to spend, I'm sorry, what the hell was the numbers? I got them coming up later. It's more than that. It's 140 billion would be geothermal for everybody in Australia. For 25 million people, I think it is. Those affected by damages, well, at inflated prices, right? Those affected by damages not covered under guidelines asked TEPCO to be flexible. TEPCO! Everybody at TEPCO should be sacrificed on reactor 3 and 4 and reactor 2 and 1 and common spent fuel pool. Powder reignites Fukushima kiln. This is in a nuclear wasteland. Potters were unable to access their workshops, so they closed down and relocated somewhere else, not in the nuclear wasteland, because they actually got a brain. Return of school in evacuated northeast Japan town celebrated. Now, we're getting absurd amount of these headlines for 6, 7, 8, 9 days, basically. They got 25 children and a daycare in the no-go zone that I was just showing you. In the no-go zone, within sight of the nuclear meltdown, and actually Akuma, which is 2 kilometers away from an ongoing nuclear meltdown. They got all these kids and a daycare set up in the no-go zone in order to make nuclear look like it has some redeeming qualities. That's the school they're allegedly building, right? It won't be open, but they're bringing the kids from 100 kilometers away, they said, 2 kilometers of the nuclear meltdowns to go to school in the town, community town hall. While they're waiting for the school to be built. But they can't live there because it's a nuclear wasteland. But they're bringing them there to go to school because the kids are obviously pawns in the nuclear industry's cruel game. It's just a game to them. They don't care about anything, not even themselves. Cherry blossom in full bloom in a nuclear wasteland. So what? People stroll beneath cherry blossoms in full bloom in a nuclear wasteland. Kata Fukushima Prefecture on Wednesday, 1,000 cherry trees were planted. So there's radioactive pollen. The ups and downs of the global nuclear industry. We're doing a news cycle, 24-hour, in this case 3-day news cycle. Germany's, we'll cover that coming up in a bit. Germany's closed down their last nuclear reactors yesterday. Nuclear industry has lost its mind. Here's a global snapshot of controversial industry. Controversial industry. Controversial. I'm going to say that about coal, gas, or oil, which are a billion times better than nuclear because they don't poison the planet for a billion years. They kill every species. The industry suffered a serious setback as a result of contaminating the entire planet in 2011. Italy has already decided to abandon atomic power in 1987 in the wake of the explosion at Chernobyl. The worst nuclear disaster in history. You can't call Chernobyl the worst nuclear disaster in history, my goodness. Fukushima was 4 reactors and 8 fuel pools. Each reactor was 100 times the size of Chernobyl and was pure uranium, pure plutonium. But that's all we see with the media. All the media likes to do that. They likes to say those words. It's important to keep the brainwashing. Fukushima hoax exposed. North Korea spies. So they're saying that the water from Japan, the fear about it is just a hoax meant to divide South Korea and Japan. And North Korea was doing it. North Korea's spies were ordered to spread false rumors about the Fukushima nuclear power plant's treated water to foment anti-Japanese sentiment in South Korea. First, well, from 1910 to 1945, Japan had annexed North Korea and ruled it with a barbaric, sadistic government approach, a military approach, right? So the country was enslaved from 1910 to 1945, North Korea. And then shortly after that, they annexed the South Korea, North Korea, and then North Korea was America, or North Korea was the Soviet Union, South Korea was America, and aka United Nations, right? In 45, United Nations was the League of Nations, changed its name to United Nations. And one of the first things they done was they used more ordnance, more ammunition on North Korea than they did in the entire World War II. The tanks are empty, right? Tanks were built all at the one time, 2017, to manipulate people into thinking that nothing's gone into the ocean. That's all the tanks were built for. That was to make you think that all the radioactive water, I mean, the reactors need 4,500 tons a minute normal operation, which would one reactor would fill up all those tanks 6 times a day. If there was 1,000 tanks, there's not. There's 750 because we counted them. And so it was an interesting story where they're blaming, and they're showing Rafael Grossi, right? We covered this story last year where they claimed in his hand he's got a bottle of water. He's claiming that from the tank, and you see a guy holding something that looks like a newspaper. That's just a chart claiming that there's only tritium in the water. And I might as well show you the rest of it because we talked about it, right? So now I got to show you. Just bear with me, it doesn't take very long. Nothing takes long. Only nuclear. Nuclear takes longer to talk about nuclear than it is to build a nuclear power plant. It's not funny, Dana. I know. There's a lot more than the tanks in this equation. So much in this equation, it's hard to wrap your mind around it if you're not familiar with the subject. So, Arriva was a filtration system. 2014 in August, 3.5 years later, there was no filtration system. And for the ALP system, 2014, 3 years later in April, has yet to function reliably. That's almost, we're almost on the anniversary of that again, right? The Advanced Liquid Processing System, ALPS, is yet to function. Not function reliably, yet to function. Same as the Riva and the Siri system. With an A, Siri with an A. TEPCO says the groundwater bypass operation not having an effect at Fukushima, that there's no fence, which is $1 billion fence to stop the radiation because, you know, you can't actually do something like that. The ice wall, which is the most bizarre one imaginable, because why not build a real wall? Why would you build an ice wall? And this map of radioactive iodine by the Americans who flew 1,000 feet over. So measuring from 1,000 feet up on an airplane, so it has to pulse a lot of energy to make it to the plane, right? It was measuring 3 million becquerels a square meter in that so-called no-go zone that I showed you earlier, right? That's basically the 3 million becquerels a square meter area. And they claim now iodine-131, but it can't be iodine-131 on its own. It has to be all the other isotopes. And Rafael Grossi should be charged for crimes against humanity, right? Spread rumors, drive out the Japanese nationals, burn the Japanese flag. Jeez, why didn't I think of that one? Burn the Japanese flag. Wait till tomorrow, I'll get one. I'll burn it. Scumbag Japan. $1 billion bonds export of Fukushima-affected food, meat alternative development, and more. The worst flag in human history is the Japanese flag. Japan has lifted restrictions for shipments, exports of several food items that have been in place since 2011 Fukushima disaster. Several food items. Well, you can't just randomly say food from this kind of food is good, but the rest of it is not. It doesn't. Radiation is not. It doesn't discriminate, right? It doesn't. I got a better way of explaining it, really, just in case you're not familiar with it. Sometimes I do, anyway. Is today one of those days? Apparently so. Here's a fallout map based on TEPCO's numbers. We have a lot of these from different countries. This is Neptunium-239 dispersion to North America. And so it covers the whole planet. This is not North America, this is the entire planet. It covered it in 26 days. It never stopped coming out, by the way. It's a continuous plume covering the entire planet. That decays to plutonium in about 2 days. Plutonium-239. Over the years, Japan has been exhausting avenues to get its food exports back on track. In a nuclear wasteland. Is it me, or am I being just uncompromising by saying... First off, you covered the whole planet with radiation, the entire planet. So you really think that it's just this little nuclear wasteland is the only thing Japan's got to worry about when they covered the whole planet, and something we got to worry about? Japan has never stopped shipping food. Canada removed all restrictions on 14 prefectures after 93 days, while 55 countries banned it for over a decade. So Japan couldn't ship it anywhere, only to Canada for a decade. But it managed to ship it to other places, because we know Korea shipped back 6 million pounds that was incredibly radioactive of just fish. Its rigorous self-imposed testing, and that's just one go, has led to much progress being achieved. There's no progress from 55 countries and regions that introduced the import bans of controls on the Japanese deadly food. Only over 40 have lifted the measures of 2022. Or 40 have lifted the measures. These are not measures. These are supposed to be permanent bans on deadly food. Why would you grow food in a nuclear wasteland, you demonic, sadistic demons? The changing face of the Canadian nuclear industry. Well, it puts on a new face every day, but it's still the same evil nuclear Canadian industry. Canada was captured by the nuclear industries in the 60s, I guess, basically. It is well poised, and now it's destroyed. Canada is not really a country anymore. It's a new Canada is another word for nuclear. It is well placed as the world rediscovers nuclear, in some cases considers it for the first time, with no appreciation for its ability to uniquely address the urgency of climate change and energy security. The word energy security is another construct, and this time of the, because this is self-imposed energy security, right? There was no issue with energy when there was 59 wars on the go. All of a sudden, there was 60. And number 60 was Russia and Ukraine, which was a proxy war by NATO, by the way. And so there was 59 wars, no problems. Number 60, all United Nations countries, participating countries, 195 of them, Canada included, put embargoes, self-imposed inflation, because they didn't replace the commodity that they were blocking from Russia. They couldn't get it from anywhere else, so why would you block it? The country, nobody in no country, if had a referendum, not a single country would have participated in that, right? But the United Nations, with the stroke of a wand, and the flick of a wrist, and the stroke of a pen, imposed sanctions, which was immediate inflation that then trickled within months worldwide. So you had 59 wars where there was no inflation, there was no embargoes, and then, boom, you had a NATO proxy war. NATO is not even supposed to exist. It was created in response to the Soviet Union. It was created in response to the Soviet Union. So when the Soviet Union dissolved, NATO should have been dissolved. And now we got this monster that nobody has control over, and that is nuclear armed, and is threatening nuclear war constantly since it's been existing. Nuclear, with its ability to uniquely address the urgency of climate change. Climate change was caused by 80 years of radiation fallout. That's what climate change actually is. Bear with me. So this is a model from France, the 16 days of radiation fallout when it stops. Think of an invisible cloud that's been going on for 80 years, but think of an invisible cloud of even just 16 days that covers the entire planet as pulsing energy every second for millions of years at the speed, the speed of light. So it's not a little bit, it's the entire planet that's radioactive. There's many models from many different countries showing us clearly that's what's going on. In Canada, the nuclear sector spent the past decade steadily employed thanks to massive refurbishment projects and early action on small modular reactors. There is no small modular reactors. And the refurbishment should have never taken place. And so what they done to get the refurbishment, they closed down 700 solar and wind farms. They took $4.2 billion for energy storage for the wind and solar farms so they can be self-sufficient and reliable 24 hours a day, and gave the money to Bruce Power. All of it. In the last year. Why would you want something like that on your planet for? In June 2009, after intense bidding process, the Ontario what the hell are they talking about? They get whatever they ask for. The Ontario government cancelled the new build. The decision followed a federal government announcement a few months earlier when it stated it would privatize the Atomic Energy Canada Limited, which is run by Americans, the national original equipment manufacturer, OEM, for CANDU technology as a valve for taxpayer relief. So, free get out of jail card for no matter how much you screw up, in other words. In Ontario's decision to axe the new build, which was really surprising, it cited the uncertainty of Atomic Energy Canadian Limited future and the price tag, because they were bankrupt in Canada. Many felt at two levels the government should have used the opportunity for domestic build to give the atomic energy of Canada and the supply chain that largely resided in Ontario leg up in international markets. Because Ontario don't have no natural industries, right? They're dependent on the automotive industry. The reason the automotive industry ended up in Ontario, Canada, which employs hundreds of thousands of people in Ontario and Quebec, I might add, or millions actually, because there's 600 factories, automotive factories in Ontario, in Toronto alone, not counting Ottawa, not counting Quebec. And so what they done was to close the fishery on the east coast of Canada, put what they call a moratorium in 1989, and they took away the budget of fisheries, so they couldn't go and patrol the coastline. They had one boat on the coastline, and they had 4,000 boats from the international fleet swooping into the Canadian waters with no resistance and pillaging the continental shelf. And so those countries put the factories here so they would close down the fisheries so the international fleet can have somewhere to fish. That's basically how that played out, right? And many felt at two levels the government should have used the opportunity for domestic build to give the atomic energy Canada limited the supply chain that largely resides in Ontario leg up international market, a sore spot that remains for some today. Well, they're talking about exporting the Canadian the disease factories known as the CANDU reactors here in Canada. These disease factories releases are astronomical for what they just emit alone is tritium. And they're where they dump it into the lakes, the Great Lakes, is right alongside the intakes for millions of people in Toronto. And just downriver is Ottawa, the capital, and Quebec uses the same water supply, right? It's really evil. It's, no matter how you look at it, it's unbelievably evil because it was engineered to be that way. That was done on purpose to poison people long term in increments, right? And the pharmaceutical industry was meant to profit off all the illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries from anthropogenic man-made radiation poisoning. 2022, reflecting the exponential increase in demand for low-carbon electricity, the four newest Pickering nuclear units, vintage mid-80s, are now being reviewed for refurbishment feasibilities as well. Well, they run the universities, they run the media, and they run the government here in Canada. Does anybody really think they won't get whatever they want? Because nuclear is supposed to disappear. It can't, like, if you took storage, like wind storage and compressed air storage, and paired it up with wind and solar, it's game over. But if you took geothermal, you can replace everything with geothermal. There's 1 billion times more energy under your feet than we currently use worldwide combined, the 4,800 gigawatts, right? And by 2026, the renewables, new renewables from 2020 to 2026 that came online will be equal to 4,800 gigawatts, which is equal to all gas, oil, coal, and nuclear plants combined by 2026, and just renewable. The biggest problem was storage, right? So they managed to stem storage non-stop, stop this from taking completely over. But it's undeniable that the technology is ripe. It's undeniable. It's unassailable because last year there was 333 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energy that came online worldwide, large ones, versus 0.4 gigawatts, less than half of a nuclear power plant. So you had over 600 times the energy of renewables came online, permanent, compared to nuclear, 600 times. So that technology, doubles every 18 months. It doubles a lot quicker than that. A new era for nuclear science in Canada. Not really, though, right? It's the same organizations. Like Chalk River National Laboratory is the head of the snake, so to speak. Meanwhile, at the Atomic Energy Canadian Limited, 14 years on, stability has long been restored. The government maintained ownership of the nuclear science technology agenda by creating a GOCO, government-owned contractor-operated arrangement between Atomic Energy Canadian Limited and Canadian National Energy Alliance to vitalize and operate Canadian nuclear laboratories, Chalk River, to manage remediation, which is absurd to suggest that they can do it, and waste management at several legacy sites. These are Superfund sites is what they're actually talking about, right? Where they just throw money away. 90% of it goes to administration. 10% of it goes to the infrastructure. And what they cannibalize so much that the money that goes to the site is just for management. Like the upkeep, light bulbs and equipment that's breaking down and new trucks for them and stuff like this. 90% of the money goes to administration for wages and perks and pensions. That's why there's such a threat on top of that, is because they won't do anything and they need more and more every year. They're true parasites. Recently, Chalk River National Laboratory, the Canadian Nuclear Laboratory, signed several memorandums of understanding with the Canadian universities to strengthen the talent and research pipeline. Canada has two preeminent nuclear engineering science universities in Ontario Tech University and McMaster University. We've covered both of them at least 1,000 times over the last decade. These are, they say they're dysfunctional is being polite, institutions. They're coasters, is what we call coasters, where they're just given lots of money, and the students that they pump out are degenerate scum, right? They're pro-nuclear scum as soon as they get into class. I advocate sending them to Fukushima so we can get rid of them sooner. With the nuclear expansion ahead, which is simply not true, work is underway to expand the reach of the nuclear education across Canada. They have total access to the schools and the universities and colleges. Have 100% access. They captured them, right? They've been infested, infiltrated. Given the needed scale of the low carbon power, nuclear is not low carbon. Carbon's good for you, by the way. No carbon, no plants, no trees, no fungus, no bacteria, no species, no bushes, no nothing. You can't have anything without carbon. Neutrality by 2050. This, again, is meant to prop up nuclear. The word carbon neutrality by 2050, this was created in the Paris Accord, which shouldn't exist, in 2015. That's where that narrative actually comes from since then, to promote nuclear, call nuclear carbon free and everything else carbon intensive. And that's what they've been doing. And the rhetoric gets jacked up every so many months, right? And we cover it all the time. Many believe it's just a matter of time for the next large-scale procurement begins. For example, in Ontario, one of the lowest carbon electricity grids in the world. No, every gas, oil, and coal, or every nuclear plant needs 2 gas, oil, and coal plants. Every one of them, right? Yeah. Well, bear with me. There's a vibrant supply community of more than 200 companies ready to take Canadian experience to other markets. Like you got to build the reactors there to have the market, and we're not doing it. We can't even build our own reactors. Same as the British can't build their reactors, or Finland and other countries. The builders right now are EDF in France, they just opened that one up in Finland, 14 years behind schedule. Their flagship reactor. Took an extra 14 years. universities, colleges are building the talent pools and collaborating globally to support others looking to do the same. Which is they've always done that, right? But it's not. It doesn't work. Otherwise, we would see this explosion. We're not seeing it. Like, they don't have the supply chain. They don't have the manufactured parts. They don't have the factories. They don't have. They just don't have the infrastructure, and we're seeing that in all the new reactors that are being built are like over budget by extraordinary numbers, and then behind schedule by extraordinary years. Every one of them, right? So there is no. If there was supply chain, you wouldn't have the issue. Canadian Nuclear Waste Management Organization is on track to site a deep geological repository. 18 years later, after getting $24 billion, they still haven't got a spot. 18 years later. And they're trying up in South Bruce, right? And they bought 1,500 acres of prime farmland, which is almost all nuclear disease factories, nuclear power plants, and nuclear dumps are surrounded by farmlands because everything is vented. Canada Nuclear Waste Management Organization is going to have a referendum next year, and they're giving half the community millions of dollars, the other half to tell them to get lost and drop dead, and then they're going to have a referendum. Because they said, they can't put it there without the consent of the community, so why not put it somewhere where there's no conflict? Why do it in a community? Because you got to have an audience? If they were trying to come up with a solution, they dropped the ball 1,000 billion times already. You got the wild north where there's no one going to protest, and instead you're going to put it right smack dab in the community on farmland surrounded by active farms. Because that's how they poison you in your supermarkets. All nuclear power plants, except for a few, are surrounded by farms. It's an absurd to suggest that Canada is on track for a deep geological repository. Nuclear, there's lawsuits right now from America, so they don't situate it near the fresh water. Nuclear has become part of Canada's DNA. No, it's not. It's the cancer side of DNA. It's a cancer to Canada. That's what it brings 1,800 diseases to Canada. It's ready to take it global. Canada's not ready to take. Like, to say that Canada is ready to take nuclear global is absurd. Just the Darlington nuclear disease factory, I think, in Ontario, Canada, part of the Great Lakes, and the intake for the water intake is right alongside of where they put nuclear. What they allege they're allowed to do, what they're allegedly allowed to put in the ocean. The numbers are just holy shit. Let me see if I can find that right quick. Can I actually find anything quick anymore? There's so much. Maybe. There you go. There's always something there to... Just hang on a second. So here's Canada's liquid and vapor releases. Each of these are just from a single reactors of tritium, terabecquerels. So 16,400,000 terabecquerels at the New Brunswick nuclear power plant on the east coast of Canada into the Atlantic Ocean. Why are they releasing so much when Gentilly is only releasing 1.6 million, which is absurd terabecquerels? In the UK, the most they're allowed to release is 8 terabecquerels a year. Canada's 16,400,000 terabecquerels a year, just from a single nuclear power plant. The Darlington is almost 1 million terabecquerels a year, and that's the Darlington plant right there. Directly into the fresh water and vapors surrounding communities, millions of people in this area. They had a accident at a tritium light facility in Ontario, in Peterborough. It released 147 trillion becquerels of tritium to the atmosphere in about 5 minutes. They didn't make it public knowledge till 2 years later or something. But the limits Canada has for just tritium releases, it doesn't even make any sense. It's actually 34 million trillion becquerels is legal to release it. 44,000 becquerels per liter is legal, whereas in California it's 15 becquerels, or 18 becquerels rather, per liter. Europe is 15 becquerels per liter. Canada's 44,000, because you can't contain it. Hot potato, will the EU lift restrictions on seafood from Fukushima nuclear wasteland? The Japanese government is making a push and never stopped, did it? For lifting the restrictions on import of food from Fukushima to European Union member countries. After the Fukushima accident, 55 countries and regions around the world restricted imports of Japanese food products. Currently, 12 countries, including Korea, China, the EU, still have restrictions in place, regulations in place. If the EU, consisting of 27 countries, lift the regulations of Fukushima food products, will be a significant achievement for monsters. And would be a significant step towards restoring confidence in the region's food. Well, just because you got a double agent, a agent provocateur removing restrictions, doesn't mean it's safe. You're going to deny the science, pretend that its radiation disappears after 10, 12 years, and still call yourself a human? You're not a human. You stopped being a human a very long time ago, apparently. Nuclear is not the solution to our energy troubles. Both the current UK government and the likely next government. So they're going to speak for the next government in the United Kingdom? Want to embrace nuclear power. No, this is the military-industrial complex in the United Kingdom wants to embrace it. Nobody else wants it. Why would anybody in their right mind want disgusting nuclear? It's not the solution to our energy troubles because it's just a fraction of the energy worldwide as it is. If you use geothermal, wind, tidal power, if you use just geothermal, it doesn't need no storage. It's 100% reliable. It's everywhere. It's easy to do. And you can set up, for $5 billion, you can build 1,000 megawatt geothermal for $5 billion. At their prices, right? They're trying to inflate the prices, but even then, it's only $5 billion to get a gigawatt, the same as a large nuclear power plant. So why wouldn't you do that? Oh, excuse me. Big man, thirsty. Both the current UK government and likely the next government. Like you've seen South Korea, where you had administration trying to get rid of nuclear, next one wanted nuclear, next one trying to get rid of nuclear, next one wants nuclear. And there's no guarantee the next one is going to embrace nuclear. And it's not the government anyway, it's the lobbyists that are, you call the government. They're not government, they're lobbying groups. There is no governments anymore, there's lobbying groups for the industries. The Great British Energy would invest in nuclear energy alongside of wind, solar, tidal, and other emerging... They never mentioned geothermal. As if it was the solution to all our problems for nuclear. And on the face of it, it should be the world would have already fully embraced nuclear, risk and all, so why haven't we? Because it's not, right? It's not worth embracing. we got a poll. Should journalists TV producers and owners be jailed for faking Fukushima Reactor 4? Well, duh. Dana. Just bear with me. I'm trying to get back on track here. I was once on track. Here's Helen Caldercott. Let me do this. Check the volume. As you know, Dana. Helen Caldercott, this is a short version, was asked in a radio show, does the reactor 4 look like the one on the right or the one on the left?
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
Well, it doesn't, though. There is no top to the building. You can't build something and then call it Unit 4. It's a nuclear meltdown. And so she's claiming that it does look like the perfect building that is not damaged. She's got 14 anti-nuclear books out there, by the way. So these are what you call controlled opposition. Very, very deadly controlled opposition. These are lethal on a whole different scale. 2 studies make a strong case for nuclear power, less pollution and a smaller footprint. Again. One team showed how nuclear power plant shutdown could cause thousands of pollution-related deaths. We covered that last week. It was MIT saying if you close all the nuclear power plants in America, it'll cause an extra 5,000 deaths a year. No, the first thing happens when you close a nuclear power plant is infant mortality rates decline. That's the first thing. Cancer rates, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, all of them go away when you get rid of nuclear. There's 1,800 diseases disappear. Another found nuclear has the least environmental impact. I can barely contain my contempt whenever I hear something like that. Nuclear has the least environmental impact, Dana. Okay. Well, here's the plutonium fallout map, for instance. Does that look like the least? Gas, oil, coal doesn't make plumes covering the entire planet in 2 or 3 weeks, okay? The Fukushima disaster, nuclear meltdowns, by the way, was a death knell for nuclear power. Yes, it was. And we intend to see that it stays that way. Rising fear and anxiety about nuclear power plants prompt many countries to phase out this form of clean energy. This is not clean energy. To call something that's obviously not clean, clean energy doesn't cover the planet in lethal fallout in 14 to 25 days, okay? A climate disaster, the disaster is caused by endless emissions from nuclear power plants. They're pulsing energy at the speed of light, visible plumes covering the planet from the bottom of the ocean far past the troposphere. Nuclear power generation is now increasing again around the world, and even environmentalists have had a change of heart. Well, like George Monbiot, Michael Schellenberg, these are not environmentalists. Listen, you can't label people because they don't want to be killed by lethal isotopes environmentalists. They're just good humans. Right? You give them that label, and then you smear the label, and by proxy, anybody that goes in that category, that are put in that category, are smeared. Air pollution would increase in nuclear plants. If nuclear plants in the U.S. are shut down, a coal and natural gas plant would step up. That pollution only goes about 50 or 100 miles. Radioactive fallout covers the whole plant in less than 2 weeks, and it never stops coming out. It would be a 5,200 deaths. Now, we covered that story and destroyed it last week, so I'm not going to do it again. Geotechnical experts say 1 in 4 international tailing dam failures are due to earthquakes. These tailing dams, there's like 15,000 of them in the Navajo Nation's lands that are abandoned, with chemical dams. That was an interesting study showing 1 in 4 international chemical dams is the best thing to call them, I think. About once every 6 months, Australia is impacted by an earthquake exceeding magnitudes of 5 or greater. So that's a bad place to put nuclear. The crack of doom. Red alert for magnitude 9 mega earthquake off the Pacific coast, as the crack discovered a 600-mile fault on the bottom of the ocean. So on the bottom of the ocean, there's a 600-mile crack in the ocean, and the stuff coming out of it, they're calling it kind of like a jelly, but it's not, obviously, right? But what they're saying is it lubricates, like oil, it lubricates the tectonic plates and allows them to slip. And because it's a 600-kilometer fault, that's a big slip, right? It would be all 600 kilometers would slip, and it might extend even further on both sides, right? So that starts out as even at the smallest would be a 600-kilometer tidal wave, a big one. That's real, right? So that as that goes across the ocean, that can become 2,000 miles wide. It's going to travel at 500 or 600 miles per hour. So it's very serious. It's interesting that they found that. They sent robots down, got pictures of it. So you got the mantle basically in contact with the ocean right there. Won't that heat up the ocean too, I wonder? German government rejects new call to delay nuclear shutdown. German government. So Germany closed their reactors on Saturday, apparently, which were already operating without requisite safety checks. You're supposed to do a safety check every 10 years. Do a major one for a nuclear power plant. They bypassed it, kept the plant open for an extra 3 months, and now they're closed down, and that's it for it. That's the end of that era. The nuclear phase out by April of 15, that's this Saturday, is a done deal, Scholz, the spokesperson, Christina Hoffman said. And she said, goodbye nuclear, good riddance. Nuclear industry will have her scalp at some point. Critics, I'm going to have critics. The lobbying, you can call a lobbying a critic, right? Lobbyists argue that switching off the nuclear power plants now deprive Germany of a source of low emission power. Yeah, but anybody in their right mind could argue the opposite. There's a critic for both sides, so why only give one side? It requires the country to keep operating fossil fuel plants that contribute to climate change. Well, fossil fuel emissions don't cover the planet in plumes that pulses energy at the speed of light for millions of years. Nuclear is the only one that's doing that, and done it now for over 80 years. It never goes away, and everything you're adding, like, so all the fuel pools worldwide are releasing massive plumes that can easily be considered a plume like that each day. Requires the country to keep operating fossil. Wolfgang, the deputy leader of the Free Democrats, said in an interview with the Funky Media Group that Germany has the safest nuclear power plants worldwide. Now, most of Germany's nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. All the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment because the fuel in the pools is still splitting the atoms. This is the real issue behind nuclear waste, but they refuse to tell you about, is the fuel is still splitting the atoms it would for millions of homes. Those atoms are released into your community, into your air, into the biosphere, where they relentlessly hunt down anything with replicating cells and try to destroy it. Switching them off would be a dramatic mistake with painful economic or ecological consequences. The biggest issue to nuclear is nuclear. Radiation in the Pacific Ocean, entire Pacific radiated, and so are all the species. You can't, you shouldn't. Once a nuclear power plant's open, you should move at least 100 miles away from it. And another study was showing that antineutrinos 150 miles away, 1.25 mile under the Earth, were detected. So living within 15 miles of a nuclear power plant, 150 miles of a nuclear power plant, a mile and a quarter underground is not going to protect you. There's a huge cost in lives from shutting off low-emission power plants, says Scumbag Media, trying to manipulate Germany to keep them open. Because it sets a precedence, right? Now today, in particular, almost all the news cycle, there's only 6 pages instead of 20, and most of that was on Germany closing down their nuclear plant. So all other news got thrown away so they can yell at Germany. It was really interesting to see the cycle do that. Even though renewable generation in Germany continues to climb, the country's low carbon emissions have only trended down slowly. First off, none of your business what they've done. And without carbon, you can't have trees or plants or flowers or insects or animals or fish or anything else or humans. We're already acclimated to carbon. Carbon is harmless. It doesn't cause global warming. How does carbon cause global warming? It's absurd. Nuclear, you got plumes of nuclear. It's easy to argue nuclear causes global warming. You got plumes of nuclear. This is just 16-day model when it stops, covering the entire planet from the ocean floor to the upper troposphere. Gas, oil, and coal don't do that. And it's pulsing energy every second at the speed of light for millions of years that destroys all cells in your body and your chromosomes, your DNA. Gas, oil, and coal doesn't do that. It does this to every species. It does it for billions of years. And it never goes away. So every day it never stops coming out. Is another year left this planet will have no life. And so there is no future with nuclear on this planet. You have to end it. It's currently the second most expensive major source of power. No, nuclear is the most expensive source of power. Not the second most, it's the most expensive. There's nothing on the planet, energy-wise, is more expensive than nuclear. Just ahead of offshore wind. Saying nuclear is cheaper than offshore wind is absurd. By the way, why don't you put your windmills on the mountains where wind blows all the time? Just the nuclear industry is such a despicable people. And then again, look, they're referring to the MIT study of an extra 5,000 deaths a year if you close down all the nuclear in the USA. it's 5 million people dying each year because of nuclear in America. Because there's 1,800 diseases. Not only that, it corrupts your immune system, so you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless. So they say it boosts gas, oil, and coal boosts the emissions of pollutants that leads to the particulates. 42% more for nitrogen oxides, 45% more for sulfur dioxide. Actually, 15 of the world's biggest container ships produce more pollutions than all the cars on the planet. 15 of them. There's currently 90,000 of them on the ocean at any given time. The 15 largest ships in the world emit as much nitrogen oxide and sulfur oxide as the world's, and carbon dioxide as the world's 760 million cars. So if you really want to get rid of the emissions, you would go after the big shipping industry, wouldn't you? Europe's stunted hydro and nuclear output may hobble recovery drive. Europe currently is labeled nuclear. And so they show you a nuclear power plant. What's in the background? Surrounded by farms. Always a coincidence, right? Nuclear power plants are plopped straight down in prime farmland. Europe lifted renewable energy supply capacity by a record 57,000 megawatts in 2022. We're just talking about Europe, not the world, but just Europe. Or nearly 9% according to the International Energy Agency. And made a scramble to replace imported Russia gas with cleaner homegrown energy. But that's self-inflicted, right? You could have done it anyway, but it's self-inflicted, the scramble, because you put embargoes against a country where you couldn't replace the commodity from. That's sedition, by the way. Record low snowfall. Not ice pack in the mountains, but snowfall, because the ice pack is all gone since Fukushima, right? So now we're dependent upon snowpack each year. Do you get it? And precipitation over the past winter looks set to drive hydro generation potential even lower in 2023. Yeah, because in the summertime, the glaciers would melt, right, during droughts, and that would keep the level up in all the rivers for hydro projects, but also so that fish can return to their spawning grounds, right? And because that's not happening, the fish are laying the eggs in the estuaries. We've never seen that before. Because Fukushima has killed most of the glaciers. It stopped the ice, the radioactive fallout, the big pulse originally, has stopped the ability of the ice to glaciate, the ice to create. And then the heat caused by the amount of energy released, this pulsing energy worldwide every second, this invisible plume that covers the planet, has heated up the planet, heated up the oceans, because you killed phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain. And by proxy, then you change the cycle, because when you get rid of the ice pack, the glaciers, and everything else, you change the current, too, of the oceans, right? The salinity, by changing the salinity, because the ice, the Great White North is melting because it doesn't have the regulators anymore. Record low snowfall. So not ice pack, because they would always say ice pack, never snowfall. Snowfall was never put into the equation. It was always ice pack. Glaciers. It took, it'll take 5,000 years. If all the radiation disappears, it'll take 5,000 years for that ice to return, if it ever does. Nuclear and hydro power accounted for average of 40% of total electricity in Europe. France is shutting all of the reactors off in the summertime because they don't have any glaciers to keep the rivers high, right? So now they have something they've never seen before, by the way. And France, 70% of its water, fresh water, goes to nuclear, which is literally the stupidest thing imaginable, because you can't, and they're all surrounded by farms, by the way. Over the first 3 months of 2023, hydropower generation in the snow-fed Alps. The snow-fed Alps. Again, they're using that word that we've never seen before. It's always ice packs. Eh? Snow was proxy to the ice pack. The ice pack caused the snow, right? And then during summers, the snowpack would melt, but not the glaciers themselves, so to speak, right? The glaciers would regulate the temperatures of the rivers, lakes, the estuaries, the coastlines. So when you knock that out of the equation, then you have die-offs because the rivers no longer have the cold water, so they don't have oxygen. They don't have the regulatory temperatures for the invertebrates, for the insects, and for all the species that are dependent upon them. And then the rivers are super hot and super low. So over a decade or two, you exterminate most of the species with that combination. Postcard protest against transporting used nuclear fuel. Postcard protest. That's here in Canada. That's the old-fashioned way, wasn't it? Environment North wants to head off a potential plan to ship containers of nuclear waste through Thunder Bay starting in about 20 years. So that'll be 40 years after the Nuclear Waste Management Organization was created and given $24 million. So 40 years later, they plan on shipping it. That's if they have a referendum with the natives and Bruce County, wherever they're going to put this to, or want to put it to. If the referendum is agreed by both, then they can start building it. That's going to take 20 years. Then it's going to be 60 years of bringing nuclear fuel, high-level fuel to these sites. And so they're not going to pass it because they're going to have a referendum. And they're building it in the community. And they want the community to thank them for poisoning them for the rest of their lives, or they won't put it in their community. And so both the natives, which voted it down last year, and in another place, in a referendum, but so Bruce now is going to have a referendum, so is the native community involved. They all have to agree to be polluted by radioactive fallout for the rest of their lives, or they're not going to build it there. So then they have to start the whole process again. It could take another 20 years to find another site selection, right? Get it? So it never happens. It's constantly hemorrhaging into the environment. The problem with nuclear is it's splitting the atoms into the environment. That's the problem with nuclear. That's just one of the endless problems, I might add. Anyway, they're sending out postcards, and they want people to fill out postcards. 25,000 postcards are being mailed out to select addresses in Thunder Bay. To send on to their MLAs, their ministers of government, to protest. Which is a great idea because you get people involved, get people thinking, using their brains. But anybody that's reading up in the media is going to get brainwashed with propaganda, right? Anybody that goes to Wikipedia is going to be brainwashed with propaganda. Opponents of a proposal to store nuclear fuel waste in northwest Ontario have mounted another postcard campaign by sending 25,000 postcards to local residents warning of the risk that would be posed by transporting used fuel through the city by road or rail. Everything is vented. So all the communities along the way after decades of transporting will be highly radioactive. And where they're going to store it to is everything is vented and repackaged. So like they give you an incentive. Some people can make a lot of money. They get them to play along. And the rest of them can get sick and drop dead and then have a referendum. What do you think is going to happen? Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which is it's the non-nuclear waste management organization, is considering the construction of a repository deep in the Canadian Shield, surrounded by 35,000 or 77,000 ponds, by the way, in Inglis or in the municipality of South Bruce near Georgia Bay. Everything is downhill to the greatest the biggest repository in the Northern Hemisphere, the biggest aquifer in the Northern Hemisphere, the Great Lakes. Although the loads will travel in strong containment casts, gamma radiation will be emitted constantly. There was, like the tip of my finger, the very tip of my pinky, was a container lost in Australia 2 months ago on the side of the road of cesium-137 gamma emitter. And they were saying that anybody who drives past it at highway speed will get the same dose as a couple of x-rays. And how they found it was just driving along the road with a Geiger counter. When the Geiger counter went crazy, they threw a marker out the window, and then a special team came in and looked for it. So imagine 50,000 pounds of it in a container driving down the road, and you're on the highway, or you're living alongside the highway. And not only that, everything is vented when it's transported, like they do for the WIP Waste Isolation Pilot Project. Everything is vented, right? First off, there's nothing that you can trust the industry. You can't trust the nuclear industry. It has nothing but contempt for everybody and everything, including themselves and everything else, every species. There's nothing but contempt. We've never seen an act of good faith in the nuclear industry. It's constant bombardment of propaganda and lies and deceit and dishonesty. Their entire legacy is predicated upon it, on deception. They don't even know what the word honest is. They've never seen the word. They go blind if they see the word. Environment North believes it's not right that only English and Wabigu First Nations have been asked by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization for a referendum. The whole country, Canada, should have a referendum. And they maintain Thunder Bay should have a say, but all of Canada should be part of that referendum. Should we put a nuclear waste in prime farmland close to the Great Lakes and the biggest aquifer in the Northern Hemisphere? Or should we put it 1,000 miles north? We've got to put it somewhere. We've got to do something. I think a big mistake is putting it permanently underground in a repository. I think it should be sealed individually, but it shouldn't be abandoned. Because you can't, if you know, there's no such thing as reclaiming it and using it again. That's crazy. But to reclaim it and store it, maybe. I don't know. That's up in the air right now. Like the very hot particles, to try to minimize the future for hundreds of thousands of years down the road. Has to be taken into context, right? This stuff is still splitting the atom into the environment all day until it goes into some kind of storage. They can't come up with a containment for it and store it normally because of the energy that it puts out. It breaks down, like they put it in 100,000 pound containers. It's still going to break those containers down over 20, 30 years from gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bombardments, beta rays. This incredible energy will destroy the integrity of whatever metal they're going to use. And that metal becomes radioactive from the constant bombardment. And so even if you do choose a location and everything goes perfect in 2024, it'll be 2044 before they start shipping it. So we're hemorrhaging into the environment for at least, now, they can only move a fraction each day, a truckload or two a day. And it's going to take them 60 years to move it all to the repository. So it's going to be hemorrhaging into the environment for the next 100 years, basically, because they're still producing it on top of that. It's an industry that never should have existed because it's so evil. It has so many bad attributes. It has no right to exist anywhere. Now, Nuclear Free North and Environmental North, and we are the Nuclear Free North, have suggested nuclear waste is best managed in secure facilities near the reactors where it came from, which is in the cities. Everything is vented into the surrounding cities and the drinking waters and the parks and the schools and everything else. So I don't think that's a good idea, leaving it in the cities. Because I think it should be 1,000 miles north, right? Way up where it's totally, there's no earthquakes, there's no floods, there's no whatever, right? It's very stable, except it's cold, you know. Dig it there and store it, but be able to maintain it for a million years. You have to sit guard on it for a million years so you can access it in case you find a way to get it off the planet and destroy it in the sun. But I advocate that we don't send it into space because these elements are not created in space. They're man-made. They're not the elements of stardust that we're talking about. These are anthropogenic man-made isotopes we're talking about, and emissions and fuel and that. The sun doesn't create these elements is the real scary thing, seeing about this stuff. And this is a threat to everything, permanently. So just a small amount of it is lethal to everything. So the tonnage we're talking about is absurd. The ghostly glow of a nuclear power station detected in pure water 150 miles away. So they actually make it glow. This is a mile and a quarter underground, buried under kilometers of rocks in Canada. The anti-neutrinos coming from a nuclear power plant 150 miles away. This is a mile and a quarter underground. The pulses cause this blue. So this blue is a pulse of the anti-neutrinos, which are prodigious from nuclear power plants, is still able to affect something a mile and a quarter underground, 150 miles away. So why would you want to live within 1,000 miles of a nuclear power plant at the surface, right? So even shelter of a mile underground, a mile and a quarter underground, don't stop the anti-neutrinos. And the industry, you got ERPA, non-clear, and the IAEA, you got all kinds of these the non-regulatory agency, nuclear regulatory agencies. You got this prolific amount of organizations, but it's the same people at each of the organizations, and they're very, very evil people. This is Catherine Higley. This is a short video that I used to get people's mind wrapped around. Now, all the people you're seeing there, I know all of these. We've talked about all of these. We've done videos on all of these people at one time or another. You see sat down. That's the press club in the United States sitting there. The Japanese guy on the right, second on the right, from the right, is from TEPCO. I'm going to play this clip because it's a 3-minute clip, but it shows you this incredible arrogance. Now, Kathleen Higley, who's talking, I've called out many times because of her lies. We've taken her lies and dissected it. She's prolific and she's very dangerous. But anyway, listen to her talking about the IAEA, ERPA, ONSCLEAR, the IPCP, and the rest of them. It's quite telling, easy to understand.
When I was trying to pull this talk together, not only will I sort of get a little philosophical about the impacts and the like and try to put things in context, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about who are these radiation experts that get trotted out in events like this, or that get to participate in various activities and analysis to make pronouncements about is something safe or not safe. And if you look, you'll see organizations that are often represented. The ICRP, International Commission on Radiological Protection, a premier organization. You'll see UNSCEAR and ERPA. So UNSCEAR is the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. ERPA, the International Radiation Protection Association. The IAEA and some of its folks, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Our own U.S. NCRP. And then there are a number of other organizations. So there's PAHO, there's the Health Physics Society, there's World Health Organization. All of these We'll bring in, as necessary, experts to speak to you on issues related to radiation protection, radiation safety, and impacts. But if you go a little deeper and you start looking at these organizations, the ICRP, for example, very well known, it's been operating nearly 100 years, not quite. Main commission, 10 people. It's got 5 standing committees, so it's 100-ish folks. I lead one of the 5 committees. If you look at the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation that looked at the effects from Chernobyl, from Fukushima, from other areas, and that has about 30, roughly, countries that are represented in that group. If you start teasing through these pictures, you're going to see the same people on every one of those organizations. So the same people from ICRP are on UNSCEAR, they're in IRPA. If you look at the NCRP, again, the U.S. organization that advises the country on radiation protection issues, it's 100 people, a lot of gray-haired 100 people. And most of them are part of UNSCEAR, are part of IRPA, are part of ICRP, participate in IAEA. So the result, or the real world, is that there's not that many folks that really do radiation safety, radionuclide transport, dose calculations, all of this in the world. It's a pretty small club. And we wear 20 hats. Today I put on 3 pins, and I could put on a whole bunch more, but Health Physics Society, ICRP,
Mass murder.
Certified Health Physicist, I've got NCRP on there, I've done IAEA, and so the point is, we're a small group, you should cherish us.
So how did everybody know to laugh, I wonder? So the ICRP, UNSCEAR, IRPA, IAEA, the NCRP, National Council on Radiation Protection Measurements, Pan American Health Organization, Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, there's more than that, there's around 100 of these organizations, right? And around 100 of them, they're all on the same, each different panels is the same people. So remember, the ghostly glow of nuclear power stations detected in pure water 150 miles away. Now they're not going to detect that from gas plants or coal plants or oil plants. Won't set off this stuff. This is man-made radiation that does it. This is nuclear power plants is the only thing that causes. It'll pulse energy through 1.25 miles of rock. They say it's low energy. Well, it can't be that low. It's pulsing energy through 1.25 miles of rock 150 miles away. And then it causes this to flash. And what you're seeing is a flash. That's just a flash. Under kilometers of rock, you should tell us how a tank of the purest water flashed as detectable particles slam through its molecules. What do you think it's going to do to your molecules, right? Really, what do you think? And then your atoms and your nucleus. The antineutrino. Protons and neutrons and quarks and the particles, physical particles, known as antineutrinos, which originated from a nuclear reactor 240 kilometers away, underground, 1.25 miles underground. Another reason to be terrified of nuclear, isn't it? I was just looking for how far underground. I got it there somewhere. In prodigious quantities by nuclear reactors. Yeah, 1.24 miles of rock, 150 miles away. An effective barrier against interference by cosmic rays, allowing scientists to obtain exceptionally well-resolved signals. can measure antineutrinos from reactors at such a large distance. Doesn't worry them, it intrigues them. Which is a Cherenkov radiation created by charged particles moving faster than light can travel through the liquid. And because when it hits the liquid, it has to slow down. Is what they're talking about. So when it hits your children that are waiting for the bus 150 miles away, it's called get sick and die, scumbag child. That's how they see you, right? They despise you. That's why Bill Gates is into it so much. I never get used to how evil this industry actually is. It doesn't mind that it's evil, it acknowledges that it's incredibly evil. There we go. I just wanted to put that over in my collection so I can find it later. So it travels 150 miles away, faster than the speed of light, which is the antineutrino. Gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas travel just under the speed of light, just under 186,000 miles per second. So then the other question is, what does 60 or 30 million one-ton bags that you picked up, what does that tell us about just the local prefecture? Because food is banned from 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima prefecture, where they picked up over 30 million one-ton bags. So all of that is pulsing energy at the speed of light. This is why they're putting it in bags. I think all pro-nuclear should be put in bags and stored somewhere. I forgot about. Interview, Core Power sees marine nuclear power. So this is another ship bunker news. And so they're talking about nuclear propelled ships, making it normal, right? With the small modular reactor, fabled nuclear reactors they're talking about. And this is just the industry. The industry, like, think about how the Pentagon works. It has 29,000 lobbyists working, or public relation people who work at the Pentagon. 29,000 of them are on the phone all day long, and emails with newspapers and companies and everything else to either do deals with them or to contribute to them some way or another to get them pro-nuclear, right? So newspapers, you got 29,000 public relation people reach out to all the newspapers after a nuclear accident and say, we're going to send you a story, you put your journalist name on it, and we'll donate to your company by advertisement from this company or this military, or we'll just donate to you, right? And so that's how it's been done for quite a long time, probably for 80 years. So it's a very effective way of corrupting a society and making it self-destruct. Nuclear reactor under consideration in Rwanda who can't even contain their own sewage or garbage. So what do you think they're going to do with nuclear waste? They don't even have enough fresh water for people in Rwanda. All the genocides are never going to go away. That personality never went away, right? FSU Faker shows academic fraud crisis is real, big, and ongoing. This was an interesting one. This was we got a folder on this stuff where you got fake studies. Seems like hardly a week goes by without some fresh academic fakery scandal coming to light. This week, a Florida State University professor, Eric Stewart, resigned from his cushy job at the taxpayer-funded school amid allegations he simply made up data for study purporting to show racism against blacks and Latinos in criminal sentencing. He's far from the only offender. A neuroscientist now serving at Stanford, the ultra-elite school university of Stanford, is being investigated for publishing papers with manipulated images in them. And four former Harvard cancer scientists had a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences retracted for data manipulation in February. Former Yale, so Stanford, Yale, who else was there? Stanford, Harvard, Yale. A Yale biologist was identified this month as a serial data faker by the Office of Research Integrity, a federal watchdog. 3 top institutions, 3 major cases of professional scamming, all from just the first quarter of this year. Well, it's worse than that. It's absurdly worse than that. We do entire presentations on studies, and where every study is manipulated, particularly with nuclear. In psychology, non-replicating research accounts for 62% of the papers. In economics, it's 39%. So 62% where they can't replicate the research. And so what does that tell us about academics? It means that you shouldn't trust them. So where does that leave us? Hungary and Russia amends the Pact 2 nuclear project agreement. The stroke of a pen. No referendums there. And then tell everybody about it on Facebook. So they do. Now they won't tell you what they done, what they changed. They just told you they done it, and then they told you they done it on Facebook. That's contempt. There's no European green transition without nuclear energy, they said. Well, that's being dishonest. That's authoritarian, right? We have to push for the PAX 2 nuclear disease factory to be built as soon as possible, despite all kinds of difficulties. Because the sooner the new blocks are built, the sooner we'll be protected from the completely insane price movement of the international energy market. But that's only because you put embargoes against the only resources you had, and you couldn't replace them. And so that was self-inflicted inflation. But do you think these people give a shit about the price of gas at the gas station? Their $5,000 suits? And details of the changes were not given. It said the European Commission would have to approve the changes, but we're not going to tell you what they are for the Pact 2 nuclear plant, aka disease factory. Contract is supported by Russia's state loan to finance the majority of the project and the fuel. Otherwise, it never gets built, right? No, and the EDF is kind of doing the same thing for France, for other countries. South Korea wants to do the same thing, where they're going to pay for it and everything else, because nobody can afford it, nobody wants it. Well, we'll give it to you, kind of for free, and the money you make, and you can pay off the loan. So why build it? Well, because we're evil, we're nuclear. Clearcourt and Canadian Nuclear Laboratories signed a strategic partnership on advanced nuclear fuel development. Well, that solves the other equation, don't it? So this is a company here in Canada, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, Chalk River National Laboratory, and Cleancore Thorium Energy has signed a memorandum of understanding to exclude everything only nuclear. Right? We don't care what other sources comes along or might come along. We're not going to look at it. We're only going to look at nuclear small modular reactors that don't exist. And they're talking about high assay fuel. And they're going to call it a neol fuel. This is mixed oxide fuel, which is illegal in Canada, by the way, I might add. Remind these people. A fuel technology leverages thorium and high-assay low-enriched uranium HALEU. Well, it's basically downblended from very high weapons grade to 16%, which is higher than the 3 to 5% the typical reactor would use by magnitudes, right? And this is reclaimed uranium plutonium. This is how they're going to get the energy from a small supply. That's the only way they can do that was use illegal mixed oxide fuel. In this case, is even higher, and they're throwing out the word thorium to disarm you. The affiliation with Chalk River National Laboratory, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, and realizing the neol fuel together with research we're conducting in collaboration with our partners in the United States. I wonder who that could be. It has to be one of the national laboratories. I can't remember which one. Los Alamos, or maybe we'll get to it. Chalk River National Laboratory, also known as Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, serves the government of Canada and the nuclear industry. Well, no, they're a contractor. The Canadian taxpayers pay for it, but it's a contractor that gets all the benefits, which is usually Americans. Work is carried out at the Chalk River Laboratories, which is not a laboratory, it's a disease factory, where they have a meltdown. The first meltdown on the planet in 1955 is still hemorrhaging into the environment, and all they've done was poured cement over it. So every time it rains there, it washes it out into the water, which is right down, just slightly downhill from it. And Chalk River is operated on behalf of Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, which is considered a contractor, but is funded by the Canadian government. Guided by an ambitious corporate strategy, because you don't want the Canadians working in it, right? And then telling other Canadians what's really going on. Fulfills 3 strategic priorities of national importance: restoring and protecting the environment. Like that, what are you, batshit crazy to suggest that nuclear is restoring and protecting the environment? You're the worst thing in all of humanity for the environment. There's nothing out there as evil as nuclear emissions on the environment. It's for billions of years, pulsing energy, destroying everything with full body X-rays. So the advanced nuclear energy for enriched life, which is a neol mixed oxide fuel, for imminent use and the can-do globally. This is what they're hoping to produce. They don't have anything, thank goodness. Oh, and Idaho National Laboratory is currently conducting high burn-up irradiation testing in one of their experimental reactors, the Idaho Nuclear Disease Factory, Idaho National Laboratories, which is built on one of the biggest aquifers in that part of the country. Nuclear is such a disgusting dirtbag, isn't it? This is probably what we're going to pick up tomorrow night, I guess. Japan lift evacuation orders in parts of Fukushima village. In part. It's so crazy. I never saw that one coming, by the way. I see most of it, but I never seen that one coming where they're going to open parts of the village. I'm laughing because it's better than me screaming. Let me explain that one more time, because this is what we're going to pick up tomorrow night right here. So the yellow section is the parts of the village they're talking about. And so it cracks me up, because when you look at the top, I'll show it to you actually. So they're going to open up 2023, this spot here by the nuclear meltdowns. The red is a no-go zone. It's radioactive nuclear wasteland. They call it a difficult return zone. But this spot here was last year, they opened that up, that little tiny section. But this section here, they just opened that up in Nami. And you got to drive through a nuclear wasteland to get to your house. Only nuclear. And nuclear, it excels in being evil. Not stupid, it's evil. Well, I guess it is stupid, but it's a whole different level of evil. Why be so evil? Gotta open up a little section where you can't stop the car, you can't breathe the air when you get there, can't cross the street, and you can't play in the garden. But it's safe. It can't be safe by picking up topsoil. You can't decontaminate with pressure washers. You got to razz the whole community, the sidewalks, the telephone poles, the fence posts, everything got to go. And then you got to build a bubble over that community, like a greenhouse, so to speak. And you got to filter any air that might get in there. And it's still not going to be safe because the anti-neutrinos can pound you 150 miles away, a mile and a quarter underground. You really think within eyesight of ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns you're actually going to be safe? My goodness. So last week we didn't do a Thursday show. I wasn't going to do a show tonight, by the way. Still pretty burnt out all day today. I mean, I'm burnt out. I've been at this a long time, and I don't take a break. And I was in hospital in intensive care unit for 20 days. Then I had heart surgery where I got 7 stents put in. And then the first thing I done when I got to the hospital is start up a show. And I haven't stopped since. So I've been out a month, right? And so I still got a ways to go to recover. And so the fact that I couldn't do it I burnt out. I call it burning out, right? Just there's so much work goes into what I'm doing. It's hard for people probably to wrap their minds around it. But to do these shows 5 days a week means you can't stop. That's the diligence. That's the price I got to pay, right? Is you have to work constantly at it, and I'm limited because I'm still not healthy. I'm getting there though, but I'm still not healthy. And so last Tuesday, James Luce had donated 160 that I forgot to mention Wednesday night, and my apologies for that. I did receive it, and I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. So just want to make sure I mention that because I might forget it again tonight, right? And that's important for me to acknowledge stuff like that so that people know that it actually showed up because the industry can't be trusted, right? Let's put on some music, I guess. And I can't find the battery for the bike that I want to get. So I got to order one in. And I haven't done anything since Wednesday. Like I haven't done nothing. I've done more work on nuclear, right? But I'm burnt out. I'm absolutely like I'm a zombie. I'm burnt out, and I'm starting to come around. Thank goodness. I got a whole bunch of shows ready to go, and this one tonight is all the recent last couple of days. Sold tomorrow night, and we got a die-off show ready to go. We got a Fukushima study on studies show ready to go. And there's going to be 5 of them. We still got to do a recap on 2022 die-offs. So that's probably going to be 4 shows that got to get done. We got spring kind of in the air. We got die-offs going all around us, and that's why I want to do one of those shows. Hopefully I'll do it this week. I'm still trying to come around, right? It's because I put my heart and soul into this stuff every day, and I've been doing it for so long. It's bound to happen, right? Where you're gonna get these days where you're burnt out. And again, like the last thing I wanted to do was not do a show on last Thursday, but I just couldn't bring myself to do a show. Poke myself in the eye a few more times. Okay, well that's it for tonight. If you've made it this far, consider giving us a thumbs up. Let's close out the poll, I suppose. Poll done really good. 98% said journalists and TV producers and owners should be jailed for faking videos and pictures inside a Fukushima Reactor 4 fuel pool. And that's the appropriate and honest response. I'll show you that one more time. So that's just a fraction of journalists that fake being in Fukushima Reactor 4. And in fact, let me play that clip. I haven't played that clip the whole show. I've been using it at the beginning of each show for quite a while for a special purpose. And maybe I won't play it because I got the wrong one there. That one can't be played. That's okay. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. I thank everybody for participating in the poll. That was fantastic, by the way. Thanks, Dana, for moderating. Your moderators, Dana and Asana. We appreciate it. Thanks for everybody. Have a great night, a great day tomorrow. Yeah, good night, Stephen Young. I'll give Stephen a shout out because I know how hard it is for him to type, for starters. And he doesn't have to, I know. I'm going to read everybody's comments after or tomorrow morning, one or the other. Yeah, it looks good. And so as soon as my show is over, anybody that's watching my show won't register on my video like it would on a normal stream. It's like nobody watches my show after. The censorship on my last two videos is ridiculous. It's like you can see the industry panicking. So we must be doing something right. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Hope everybody had a great weekend and a great day tomorrow. We'll see you on the other side. Have a great night. Hugs for everybody. Take care now. Yeah, good night, everybody. See everybody tomorrow night. Take care.